in Central Africa, and from fragile ceasefires to billion-dollar infrastructure deals, Central Africa continues to be a region of shifting alliances and simmering tensions and strategic investments. In the DRC, a humanitarian aircraft has been shot down by rebels just days after a truce was signed between DRC and Rwanda. And the United States is negotiating a major mining deal with Kinshasa at this time. Chad's former prime minister has ended his hunger strike, and Cameroon sees a surprising presidential bid by one of Paul Biya's longtime allies. Well, let's try and unpack some of these stories and what they might mean. And joining us is geopolitical analyst Aaron Ngambi. Aaron, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Peter, and good morning to our listeners this morning.
So let's begin in the DRC. Kinshasa says that the plane recently shot down by rebels was carrying humanitarian aid and this happened just days after a ceasefire deal was signed with Rwanda. What does this incident tell us about the fragility of that truce, and what's signed in Washington, does it translate into what's happening on the ground?
Yeah, that is where the concern is. That's the problem. The problem is that what you saw in Washington, D.C., parties to the conflict and parties that have signed an agreement that seem to be very vague. For example, in this truce between Rwanda and the DR Congo over that conflict, they do not even mention the aggressor. I think M23 is not even, rebels are not even in the picture here. That is a major problem. How do you solve a conflict without understanding its root cause and what the problems are and addressing those problems? So for lack of them trying to identify who the aggressor is in this conflict and addressing the issue head on, they've left a vacuum for vulnerability of this agreement.
Yeah, I mean, very quick thoughts on this, because there's so many mixed reactions about this peace deal or this agreement, inverted commas. Some see it as a breakthrough, others dismissing it just as window dressing. Very briefly, what's your assessment?
I think that it lacks all the credibility of a peace deal that will last. The reason for it is because even the breaker of this, the mediator of this deal, the United States, you look at what Trump said. Trump clearly said that he does not even understand the region. He does not even understand the conflict. He's not comfortable talking about the historical context and the issues between Rwanda and the Congo. And because of that, how do you expect the United States to broker a deal between the two? The interest of the United States in this deal is just the mineral rights in the Congo. Trump is very clear. He said this is what the U.S. will benefit from this, and not what the Congolese will benefit or the Rwandese will benefit, or what is the interest of the M23 rebels and how they can address that. This is the problem, and I think that this is why we're even seeing that a plane is shot down. The conflict is still kind of going, even though that there was agreement that was signed in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, in the end, it really is about the people on the ground, and often these deals, these mining deals in particular, often benefit the elites rather than ordinary citizens. All right, let's turn our attention to Chad, and former Prime Minister and opposition leader Sucé Masra has ended his hunger strike. What do you think prompted the strike? Can you remember? And what does this say about Chad's political climate just months after the contentious presidential elections?
Well, Sucé Masra is an interesting figure. Like you've said, former prime minister, he's an opposition leader now, and he's been incarcerated on political charges. And I think there are a lot of people that feels like the government is trying to shut him down. He's a rising star. I mean, he's in his early 40s, and he has done a lot to show that he is a people person when he was prime minister. Therefore, when he was incarcerated about a month ago, on trumped-up charges, on politically motivated charges. He took a position just a week ago to go on hunger strike, and the reason for that was to raise awareness to this incarceration, this injustice. And I think that he's called it off now because we understand that physically he's become weak, even though he's in spirit he's still very, very vigilant. And so he's called it off, I think, to avoid health complications, but also he has brought enough attention to his case, I think, around the continent as well as on the global stage.
So, in Cameroon, Issa Bakary, a longtime friend and ally of President Paul Biya, has announced his plans to run for president. How significant is this development? Does it signal any real political shift in the country, long dominated by Biya himself? Or are we perhaps seeing, a secret plot by Biya to anoint a successor?
Well, this has two implications. First of all, it looks like Cameroon the political space is opening up. It looks like now people feel a little bit comfortable to come forward and want to run for public office. Unlike the last 40 years that Biya has ruled the country, he has had an iron grip on political activities. Now that the incumbent is 92 years old, probably won't even run again, we see that close allies and also oppositions are a little bit more involved in the politics of the country. So that's one aspect of it. But also, I think that it's just some people dismiss this as just his friend being opportunistic. He just wants to run now that he knows that his friend and his boss is physically incapable of running for office again.
Tell me a little bit about, are there people who are, apart from this friend and ally who's put his name forward, are there others, maybe in opposition, who are likely candidates, or as you say, one just doesn't say, one doesn't speak up for fear of retribution?
Yes, I think that we have an opposition leader. Not long ago, he was being harassed. I think he's about 71 or 72 years old. He is not an ally of Paul Biya. I think he's tried to make his mark in politics. But it's been difficult. You know, the Cameroonian political landscape has been very difficult to navigate because of the kind of leadership style that the incumbent has imposed on the country for so many years. But we've had one or two figures in the opposition that have tried hard to penetrate, but it's been difficult. I think that we're going to see that change in the upcoming elections. And for reason being, it's because the absence of this strong man at the helm of government might just create the opportunity for more people to come forward.
Let's look at Gabon. Under transitional military rule since last year, they've managed to secure a $2.3 billion loan from the African Import-Export Bank for infrastructure. What do we read into this? It's quite interesting that a military transitional government would get such a formal loan. Is this a sign of confidence in the junta or a pragmatic economic move?
Well, Peter, this junta has tried to camouflage itself, has tried to transition from being a military general to being a politician in suits. I think that even when he approaches some of these institutions, Western institutions and financial institutions, he is approaching them as a potential transformational leader. You know, he is approaching them as a guy that took over a dynasty of the Bongo family, and now is interested in democracy. But we've seen some of these things play out in the continent before. We have a military leader come in and start very well, but then they overstay as well. In 1986, we had Yoweri Museveni in Uganda tell the people that the problem with Africa is that we have leaders who overstay in office. But today, in 2025, Yoweri Museveni says he's going for a re-election in 2026. So that tells you that, of course, there's always these, we're always excited. There's always this euphoria about the new leadership of some of these juntas when they come in. but it's very difficult to translate that from real democracy. But what we're seeing in Gabon, we hope that it will be a different story. We hope that this $3.2 billion that they have acquired from the Africa Import and Export Bank will actually go to the real infrastructure development that the country needs, rather than going to the pockets of the politicians.
I am curious about the position taken by international lenders like Afrexim Bank. They're increasingly willing to work with these transitional or military-led governments. Are they saying, look, as long as there's a solid economic case, we're not too concerned about the politics, because in the end, we're really more concerned about the citizens on the ground?
Well, that's always been the miscalculation by some of these institutions, especially Western institutions. They've always thought that, well, because we can give this money to whoever is a leader of the country, be it a military leader or even civilian politicians, that kind of assistance will trickle down to the people. And their argument is that this is good for the nation. But even without putting in safeguards or mechanisms that will monitor the facilitation and the use of these resources, and I think that is where such as the Africa Import and Export Bank should pay more attention to, is what are the mechanisms that are in place to facilitate that this kind of money that is given to Gabon actually goes or translates to what it is meant for.
All right, and perhaps finally, is there anything else that we really should be paying attention to in the region that we haven't talked about?
There are quite a few things happening in the region. We hearing about this court case in Zimbabwe about what happened in the 1980s, right after they got independence. I think you're aware of the Gugura Wundi case. This is the massacre that happened under the reign of Robert Mugabe, and now the Mnangagwa regime wants to put a closure to that. So they're trying to go for the courts to address the issue, as well as more of like a truth and reconciliation arrangement. But the opposition and few people are opposing that because they feel like President Mnangagwa was part of the Mugabe regime and state security minister at the time, and been accused by many people to have been a participant in those massacres, is not the right person to address these issues. So we see that unfolding, and we'll see where it goes. But Mnangagwa seems to be very fixed about trying to get this behind. Basically, some people think he wants to whitewash history and put this behind them.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult one, and you're so right. I think a lot of people only finding out years later just the full extent of what happened. The only media that was there at the time that people could consume was state media, and so they didn't really get the story, except the propaganda that was being meted out. Aaron, we're going to have to leave it there. Your insights and analysis always greatly appreciated. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Peter. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you. That's Aaron Ngambi, one of our regular commentators from Central Africa, telling us about what's been happening in the region. And it's time now for your news headlines with Onele Nsinzi.